All right. I hope you're all with me and enjoying the course so far. So let's quickly go ahead and summarize what we have learned so far. So we walked through Tableau setup, how to create Excel files and then connect to Excel files and SQL Server databases. We looked at joining different data sources and connections. We walked through the concept of left joins, right joins, full joins, etc. We created some basic tabular reports and graphs, and we also explored the concepts of live and extracts connections, and we ran through some basics of calculations, right? So let's actually take this a little bit further, right? Let's since we have introduced the concept of graphs, let me show you a few more things that you can do with graphs and what are the options available in Tableau. So we look at one specific example here. It's basically how to take some tabular data or how to take any data and then create a stacked distribution chart, right? So let me actually show you how to do that, and then that will help you to kind of analyze when would you use this versus when it's helpful, etc. Right, so we're going to use the same report that we've been playing with so far, and let me go ahead and do something over here. Yeah, let's take this interest rates by region and just duplicate this, right? So we have some data to play with, and I'll go ahead and rename this chart to something like interest rates distribution, right? So you have region, you have some metrics around it, and actually we don't need to, so let me go ahead and just remove one of the measures. So we have these two, and then naturally when you're building some sort of bar charts and stuff, it's always nice to show it as a trend, right? I like to generally use a trend so that you know how the data looks like over a period of time. And the best way to do that is to introduce dates, right? So once you introduce dates, you have dates and the regions and then some metrics around this. So this is the typical tabular data. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually look at some of the graphs that is provided over here, right? These are all the ready-made graphs that is provided. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to specifically look at one of them, which looks like a stacked bar, right? So once you click on that, it kind of creates a stacked bar over here, which without any label at all, right? So it's basically the same tabular data, but actually showing it more graphical manner. These colors that you see are completely customizable, and if you hover on them, it shows that the blue color is for Europe, the Africa is the red color or the yellow color, and so on and so forth. In essence, what we're trying to do is, suppose if the metric says population is 100 for 2004, how is the split of that 100, right? That's what it shows by different regions. And to make it a little bit more intuitive and descriptive, let me go ahead and practice some of the things that we learned in the previous lecture. For instance, you can take this metric and just say show me labels, and it'll actually show you labels, right? So you kind of get all this information out there, and there is tons of stuff over here that's available when you right click, and we'll go over these in the coming lectures one by one. I didn't want to really overwhelm you with a lot of features in just one shot, but I want to show you a couple of things more over here. One of the things is, definitely you can go ahead and edit the colors, right? These are the automatic colors it is assigned. You can definitely go ahead and choose, some other color palette and use them. Then these are plain numbers. You can definitely use percentages, right? So you see that the blue color is the maximum percentage, 50+% of this total bar chart, and you can actually show them as percentages as well. And this is where I wanted to introduce the concept of table calculations or quick table calculations. So quick table calculations is basically a set of calculations that it applies to your metrics or your measures. Like in this case, what I want is percent of total, right? So if I choose percent of total, it does something weird over here, right? So it has 5%, 0.8%, 0.5%, 0.5%. So in short, if I just add up all of these things, it doesn't really add up to 100. Now, why is that happening? That's because if you add up everything in this page, it'll add up to 100, right? But what I really want is the percentages for each of these bars. And the way you can actually do it is basically going to compute using and saying table down. So once you do that, then it will calculate independently for each bar in the bar graph, So now this is a more interesting graph to view. Distributions especially is very helpful for me in my analysis. The reason why I say that is let's take an example of maybe say call volumes, right? I work probably in a call center and I'm looking at call volumes, and I say that we receive whatever 1 million calls a day. I'm just making this number up. Naturally, the question comes: is it okay? It's worldwide, 1 million calls. That sounds good, but I really want to get sort of a split by countries, right? And that's where these things are useful. Maybe I can say that 30% of the calls come to US, 20% of them go to Europe, 70% goes to Asia. This is more descriptive to me, right? And this is a really good way of analyzing rather than just analyzing straight averages, right? On an average, I get whatever 3 calls per day. If I actually split that, I would say that maybe in Asia it's 10 calls per day, right? That's where the concept of these stack bars and distributions and all play a major role. So very interesting things over here. The next one I actually wanted to show you was the concept of, again, it's a different variation of how to join different data sources. So let me go ahead and actually show you another way of joining a data source. So let me go ahead and just close this one. And all right. So I'm going to go ahead and just prepare some data for now. You really need not worry about what I'm typing over here and some basic syntax and stuff. These are just pure SQL commands I'm typing. This is in no way related to any knowledge, any prerequisite that you need to know in order to learn Tableau, right? So let me actually go ahead and just look at our country region, which we have been playing with, and it has about 250 rows or something, 238 rows, and I'm going to choose just a portion of it. So I'm going to say that where country region code, like and I'll just say starting with A, right? So this will give me a bunch of rows. Oops, forgot a keyword. So this should, hopefully this should work. So this is giving me all the rows starting with A, and I also want all the rows that does not start with A, right? So if I just execute this will give me all the rows does not start with A. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to just put this into a table so that we have some data to play with. I'm calling this as tab 1 and I'm calling this as tab 2. So we have 2 tables created, one with rows starting with A, other with rows not starting with A, right? So if I just refresh this, I will find 2 tables created here. And I'm going to precisely use these 2 tables in my example. All right. So let me go to my data source, and then I'm going to create a new data source right now. And I'm going to connect to my SQL server. And then let's go ahead and play with some data. So we just created these 2 tables. I'm going to drag and drop tab 1. This is typically how you have been doing so far, right? You used to drag and drop a particular table. Either it's connecting to Excel or it's connecting to whatever, SQL server or anything like that, right? So I'm going to follow the same thing. But now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put one table above another, right? So I'm going to kind of, maybe merging 2 tables is a wrong word. It's actually combining 2 tables, right? So let me show you that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take tab 2 and then put it over tab 1. See, it shows drag table to union. So basically you're unioning tab 1 and tab 2 together, right? So if I just update this, you will see that it has all the rows starting with A that came from tab 1 and all the other rows that came from tab 2. So essentially you put one table over another, right? So this is actually very helpful. So if you see the table name, it'll actually show you the source table names as well, right? And then once you do this, then it's pretty much same as how you would do anything else. Like you have tab 1 and tab 2. You can actually, if you just drag and drop country region code, you'll find that all the tables have been, kind of unioned between the 2 tables, right? So this is one way of actually joining data. I wanted to show you one more technique over here, right? So we actually saw concept of joins, union, merging and all. But if you actually think from a little bit higher view, what we did is we were actually connecting to an external system like SQL Server or Excel, and then doing all this data manipulation, right? No doubt it makes your life much simpler because you don't have to write too much code. You just point to a data source, join whatever you need, and start creating your reports. But I want to show you one more thing. Here you have 3 Tableau data sources, right? And if you remember in the previous lecture, I told you that one of the cool things I like about Tableau, and one of the cool things I like personally, is that you can actually create these data sources and actually deploy it to a server, right? So that your analyst does not need to really worry about what tables to join, what are my column names, what to do, what else my server name, permissions, and stuff like that. I have done all that stuff for you, and I have actually deployed it into a Tableau server. So when my analyst comes to office, all he needs to do is basically connect to that particular data source. In this case, it's tab 1 or data by country, and start creating the reports, right? So say for instance, I have actually deployed 2 Tableau data sources for him. One which stores everything about an employee, and one which stores everything about maybe parking, right? Car parking. And he is basically supposed to do some analysis on employee car parking. Means he needs data from both these sources, right? How will he do it? Because I have already deployed this, packaged it into a Tableau data source and deployed it, and he has actually connected to this, but he needs a way to kind of join these 2 Tableau data sources. So Tableau provides an interesting way, and they call it as data blending, and I'll show you how to do that in a short while. So the way you do that is there's something called as a primary data source and a secondary data source. And let me actually, since I was playing around with this, let me go ahead and actually delete everything so that I can show you from scratch. Okay. All right. So the way you actually do this is, let me actually take a new sheet so that it's fresh, and I'm going to connect to data and say edit relationships. And what it basically tells you is, it asks you which columns from your primary data source should be joined to a secondary data source, right? So your primary data source is country region, and secondary maybe is tab 1. So let me kind of quickly first show you some data. It's basically country region codes, and it's kind of similar, right? So here you cannot do that because it's coming from different data sources. Now what I'm going to do is basically join or blend these 2 data sources. So the way you do it is click on the first data source, country region code, and say edit relationships. And then, you have to define how you want to join, right? The primary and secondary. And the way we want to join is using country region code. Click OK. And then boom, like both have joined, right? So you can go ahead and test this. You can drag and drop country region code. And then once you click on tab 1, you see a small link appearing. This basically says that this has been joined to some other data source. You can drag and drop maybe the name, and see it has actually pulled it from the secondary data source. So the first column is coming from country region Tableau data source. Second column is nicely joined with the other data source. Now there are a few things to consider over here. Data blending as you go with your reports might be a little frustrating, right? There are some rules. I have put some reading materials. Like for example, when you join the primary to your secondary, each row from primary should join to exactly 1 row in secondary, right? It cannot be a 1:many relationship. And naturally, there are a certain set of rules for aggregations as well. So in short, this works, but at times it might get frustrating and it will not join because you might have a 1:many relationship, and you might get something like asterisks or stars all over the place. Like, instead of actual values, you'll just get stars over here. That just means that it's trying to join a 1:many relationship, and that's not allowed in this blending. The other thing I wanted to share is I have personally seen that if your 2 Tableau data sources are very, very huge, your report sometimes becomes slower, and especially if you have filters and stuff, which we'll look at it in further lectures, it can actually get slower. So that's why I just wanted to introduce to you how to join data sources, like multiple options. One is definitely we saw how to join from the raw data sources, how to use the concept of left joins, right joins, unions, and then this is one more technique, right? So if you have all these things in your plate, naturally your analysis and report building becomes much faster, because you know what's out there and you don't need to really write code. Basically, you know what to use at what time and then save time on that. So that's why I just wanted to introduce you to all these different concepts. So I hope some of these concepts were useful. We'll definitely go further in the coming lectures. We will basically look at a new concept called calculations. Calculations is nothing but, you know, adding your custom logic from your existing set of columns, right? We looked at a basic example of first name, last name. We will look at a little bit more examples of using calculations. This will be especially useful when you're designing KPIs or key performance indicators and so on and so forth. I would strongly recommend definitely practice these different data blending, data joining, and unions, because it's going to be a real lifesaver for you. And definitely, if you have questions, you know, feel free to ask through forums, through YouTube comments, you know, or just contacting me. I'll be happy to help wherever I can. Thank you so much.